I'm Nena Couch, Head of Area Studies and Thompson Library Special Collections with the Ohio State University Libraries. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers from the worlds of music and law. Alan C. Michaels is the Edwin M. Cooperman Chair in Law at the Moritz College of Law at the Ohio State University. From 2008 through 2019, Professor Michaels served as the Dean of the College of Law. Professor Michaels' practice career included a clerkship at the United States Supreme Court with Justice Harry Blackmun, several years litigating on behalf of the Major League Baseball Players Association, and service as a prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In his academic career, Professor Michaels' research has focused primarily on criminal law and criminal procedure and has been published in the nation's leading law journals. While serving as dean, Professor Michaels co-taught a class with then University President Michael Drake called The Supreme Court and Civil Rights. The class, a seminar for honors freshmen, also covered the music of the era, and each year featured a musical guest. Professor Michaels had what he describes as the thrill of a lifetime when Mary Wilson served as the inaugural musical guest for that class. I joined Professor Michaels in that thrill of a lifetime to welcome Mary Wilson of the Supremes today. A singer, best-selling author, motivational speaker, businesswoman, former U.S. cultural ambassador, mother, and grandmother, the legendary Mary Wilson continues to make incredible strides on her journey to greatness. As an original founding member of the Supremes, Mary achieved an unprecedented 12 #1 hits, with 5 consecutively from 1964 to 1965. Those songs, and I know some of you will be singing at home, are Where Did Our Love Go?, Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop in the Name of Love, and Back in My Arms Again. In 2018, Billboard celebrated the 60th anniversary of its Hot 100 chart this week by revisiting their rankings to celebrate the Hot 100's top artists of all time, where the Supremes ranked at number 16. According to Billboard, with their 12 #1 hits, the Supremes still hold the best all-time record, not only for female recording groups, but for any American groups. With no sign of slowing down, Ms. Wilson published her 4th book, Supreme Glamour, on September 17, 2019. This highly anticipated coffee table book showcases the beautiful gowns the Supremes were known for over the decades and delves into more of their history. Fall 2019 marked an exciting time for Mary. On top of releasing her new book, she stretched her dancing muscles when she joined the cast of the 28th season of ABC's Dancing with the Stars. Investing the same passion she brought to singing with the original Supremes and her solo career, the world-renowned performer is an advocate for social and economic challenges in the US and abroad. Ms. Wilson uses her fame and flair to promote a diversity of humanitarian efforts, including ending hunger, raising HIV/AIDS awareness, and encouraging world peace. 2018 marked an important step forward for Mary's fight for the Music Modernization Act, or MMA. Her vision came to fruition when the United States Legislature signed the act into law on October 11, 2018. The act aims to modernize copyright-related issues for new music and music recorded before February 15, 1972, which were previously unprotected due to new forms of technology like digital streaming. Her advocacy for this act grew from her commitment to gain fair compensation for herself and other legacy artists when their songs are played on digital streaming services. The Ohio State University Libraries is honored to hold the Mary Wilson collection. The collection contains legal documents and related materials from several of the watershed court cases Mary Wilson brought to help further artists' rights. We're excited to bring Professor Alan Michaels and Ms. Mary Wilson together for a recorded interview discussing the Supremes and musicians' rights activism, featuring content from the Mary Wilson collection at The Ohio State University. Mary, Alan, take it away.
Thank you, Nena.
All of that, boy, all of that's a lot, huh? There was a lot of
bio information there. And can I just say this one thing that I am a grandma too. People get read tell all about your, what who you are, what you've done, but they always forget to say that I'm a grandma. 10 grandchildren and
Wow.
one great grandchild. And also I graduated from NYU. May I call you Alan or
Yes, please.
Professor Michaels? I mean, what you
Alan would be
oh,
great if I could call
okay.
you Mary,
Okay,
even
all
if I
right.
can't, but I'd love
Yeah,
to.
yeah, please. So yeah, so I graduated from NYU, and it was 2001. I got my associate's degree, and you and I were talking before we started the interview about my mom not knowing how to read nor write because, back in when she was a young girl, Black people were not required to have get an education or go to school. So my mom never went to school, and she never really learned how to read nor write. So for me, one of the biggest things that she wanted to see her children achieve was to go to college. Now, the thing about us is that we wanted to become singers after we kind of, got into singing. And I remember saying to Eddie Holland, one of the producers of our 10 of our number one records, I remember saying to Eddie, listen, we got to get a hit record. And this was before 1961, right? I said, we got to get a hit record because if we don't get a hit record, we'll have to go to college. Our parents are going to make us go to college. Can you believe that? So, it was very important for us to get that hit record. But I remember when I first went to move back to New York, I thought about my mom because my son had died in a car accident, and so I needed to have a change of everything environment. So I moved from LA to New York, and the one thing I thought about, I said, you know what? I think I should go to college because that's what mom would have wanted. So I went back because of her wish and graduated, got that associate's degree. And I could have gone on longer, but I'm like, I don't need any more anything else on my walls. I got enough gold records. I don't need anything else. But yeah, I got the associate's degree because of mom. And so
Yeah,
that
I'm
was
sure you made mom very, very proud in her lifetime, but then
yes, yes,
to follow up on her desire in that way.
yes. It was
Very-
just a wonderful tribute to my mom because I knew how important that was for her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I will say also you've contributed to the education, undergraduate education of students at Ohio State.
Oh, good.
So I was so
Mhm.
grateful to have you as a guest lecturer and tried to act a little bit professorish and not just as a fanboy.
Oh,
Since
you were very professional now.
thank you.
Okay.
So, and I want to maybe start there
Okay.
because that class was about the civil rights era,
Yeah.
and we focused on the Supreme Court and its actions, but not just the Supreme Court, but also the music of the era. And so that got us not only the Supreme Court, but the Supremes. Um, and when you I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your experience because in the early 1960s, you were still a teenager. And you were a Black woman teenager in the United States uh,
Mhm.
at the really at the dawn of the civil rights era. And there was so much that was closed to you, so many barriers. At the same time, you had this string of number one records. You were the most glamorous woman in America. You were the idol and the heartthrob of literally millions. And I'm trying to get my mind around that
Mhm. Mhm.
disconnect between being adored and worshipped um, and shunned and treated as second class in some ways. And can you
Mhm.
talk some about what that experience was like?
Well, I think I'll start from the beginning and let's put it there. We were three young Black teenage girls when we started singing. Of course, as we spoke earlier, we signed our recording contract at Motown, when we were 16 years old, but we actually started singing.
1961.
Yeah, we actually started singing when we were only 13 years old. So, we were, it was at a time before the Civil Rights Bill was passed. You mentioned all the hit records, but that didn't come until years later. Like you mentioned, 1961, we kind of signed the recording contract, but we didn't get the hit records until 1964. But we had started recording, and this actually changed our lives. And it was like the first phase, I guess you could say,
Mhm.
when because as I mentioned, we were Black girls at a time when Black wasn't beautiful yet. Black wasn't accepted yet. Well, some people, we couldn't vote. We were too young to vote, but I mean, our parents and our aunts and our uncles, we grew up with them telling us stories of when they grew up in the South. We say down South, and they would tell us when they would be have to pick cotton. That's what they did. And so it was one of those things where we realized that what we were doing was we were just singing just to have fun at the age of 13. It was all about fun. We weren't yet trying to become stars, because back then, no one Black was thinking about being a star. Okay, now everybody thinks they're a star. I mean, everybody knows they're a star, right? But back then, it was like I've always said it was almost like an impossible dream for us to dream about singing. So, we started singing at 13. So from 13 until 14, 15, 16, we were just doing record hops. And the young children who are going to see this won't even know what a record hop is, because it was from the era of the 60s when the DJs would have these record hops. And so we would just go and sing at some of the record hops for fun. But once we started singing, and we were singing with major stars, Johnny Mathis, there was a lot of people, we were like the local girls. They said, "Here come our hometown girls." We would sing live. We would sing live with a guitarist. But we were on the show with all these other stars. And pretty soon we said, well, wait a minute. Maybe that's what we should start thinking about. So that's when we started dreaming, about doing something different. And when we finally went to Motown Records, because their stars, Mary Wells, Marv Johnson, and people like that, the Miracles, we could hear them on the radio. That's when we really started looking towards something different, something more. And our parents allowed us to do it because they, at least they knew where we were, that, we were doing something we enjoyed, and they weren't, we were four girls. We were okay to be out there. So they weren't afraid of us, being hurt or harmed or anything, because they knew we were doing something that we enjoyed. So then we finally went to Motown Records, as you said, and it was one of those things where once we got there, boy, we started seeing a whole new world. It was a company full of Black creative people coming in. I remember Mr. Barry Gordy said, "Girls," he would call us the girls, "I want you to stay here because I have a little genius coming here, and I'm told that he's only 9 years old." He says, "I want you girls to see him." So we said, "A genius? Okay, I don't think I ever knew what a genius was." But anyway, little Stevie Wonder came in there, and boy, let me tell you, he played every instrument in the Studio A. And I'm like, oh, that's what a genius is. You know what I mean? I didn't know. And then, of course, Marvin Gaye came. I mean, all the creative people. And that's when I think all four of us said, you know what? This is something we think we really want to do, and started thinking about becoming stars. Because at the same time, after that, we had to start getting the hit records. So we became divas and citizens at the same time, because of the Civil Rights Bill, was passed. So it was a
Mhm.
very pivotal moment for us. And I can say that we made our dreams come true by just being at Motown Records, having those hit records. And, we started doing shows around the world. We became, like we had here in the United States, you had the British invasion, and the people, they were coming here and we adored them, and we would go to Europe and they adored us. So the UK was, our sort of home base. It was wonderful to experience, and they treated us like human beings over in the UK. That was what was so great, is that it was a different feeling from how we were treated in the United States. It really
Can I
was.
can I ask you to talk a little bit about that? Because of course, when you say you were treated as a human being,
Mhm.
reaction is, well, yes, you are a human being, of
Yeah, but you know, like
but
I mentioned, the Civil
mhm,
Rights Bill had been passed yet, and so as I mentioned, growing, I didn't grow up in the South, but I was born in the South, and then I lived there until I was about 4 years old, I guess 3 or 4, and you know, it was amazing because I remember my dad passed away in 1961. That was the same year I graduated, and I had to go to the South where he lived, and you know, we had to buy him the clothes. You know, you buy gloves and the ties and all that stuff when people pass, and so I went downtown with my cousin, and so my cousin who lived in Mississippi, and she said, "Now, Mary, I know you're from up north, you know, but I want you to know you cannot talk to these people down here like you talk to everyone up north, because they will kill us." And I remember her saying, she said, "I still live here. So you'll be going back to Detroit or up north, and I could be killed, you know, so please be quiet." And I didn't quite understand it because in Detroit, you know, still segregation was there, but we all lived in our individual segregated areas. You know, the whites had lived in one area, the blacks in another, the Chinese, you know, so you were, and then, you know, you got along with the white people in up north where we lived, as long as you didn't come to their neighborhood. So anyway, when my cousin told me that, I'm like, okay, I'll be okay, okay. I didn't quite understand what she said, but in buying the things for my dad when he passed at the shop, I said to my cousin, I held up this pair of socks. I said, "This is too cheap." I said, "Don't they have anything better?" And the store owner heard me, right? And he said, "I can tell she ain't from down here, you know, talking like that." And my cousin said, "Yeah, but that's okay. I'll buy it. We'll buy it." Da 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 da. And so, you know, we left. But that was one of the first time I really saw or heard someone talk to us like that. I had heard my parents and everyone talk about it, but you know, like I said, we were in a segregated Detroit, so we didn't come in contact with a lot of white people, and if we did, it was at a place where they were, you know, it was all cool. So that was
mhm.
one of the first times that I really, you know, saw something that was like, whoa. And after that, of course, we went back to Motown and we got the hit record. So, and
And
our whole lives changed. You know, then we were, like I said, when we traveled around the world, the world didn't really have the same problems that we had here in America against Black people, you know, because it was just a different mindset for everyone else.
did you, when you became the superstars, uh,
Hmm.
still very young, uh, treated well worldwide, but did
Hmm.
you have did that change everything for you in the United States, or did you find this you still were under threat or put in what someone else saw as your place, as
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
story you described with your father's thing?
Well, you know, Detroit was a fantastic place to grow up. I have to say that we had great education, and white people were in the minority at the school we went to because there were a few of them, but it was more black. So I mean, I always, as black people, we really didn't have the same kind of problems that they had in the South. Even though this was a time when, you know, the freedom marches and all those things were beginning.
Hmm.
So we became involved with a lot of that, and really saw a part of America that we didn't really know. And I recall on one of the Motown shows, we toured the South, and it was called the Motown Review. Everybody was on it. It was the Marvelettes, the Temptations, the Miracles. I mean, all the acts were on it, right? Stevie Wonder. Um, and so we were touring. We went down south, and it was an all black tour, obviously. So the audiences were, on one side would be the whites, on another side would be the blacks. And if they had the balcony or the lower part, the blacks would be upstairs on the balcony. So we performed in those places. And but the problem that we saw and traveling and touring in the South was that we couldn't stop it, you know, and just eat anywhere we wanted to eat. because you were, and then if we did, we would have to go around the back. So that was something that was quite an opener for us to have that. But I recall one time, once we were performing, and everyone got so excited about the show that the blacks and the white, they just started getting up and just partying all over the place, and you could see the policemen try to, get the, get back people back to their own spots. So that was one time. Now that was a Motown review that was, excuse me, that was all black. But when we, in 1964, when we got our first hit record, Motown was very wise in saying, I think we think that this record, Where Did Our Love Go, is going to be their big hit. So they decided to put us on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour. And that changed our lives. So we've had all those pivotal moments that things changed, but that's when we became famous, because on the tour, there was Gene Pitney, and it was a multi-racial racial tour. It was Gene Pitney who was a star. I think it was Jan and Dean. You had Mike Clifford, and then you had the Shirelles, you had the Drifters. So it was like, well, it was really a wonderful kind of racial program. So we toured the South again, and this time it was major. Alan, let me tell you, I will always take my hand up for Dick Clark, because when we would go to some of these um, uh, places, and say if we were on a bus and we want to stop to eat, sometimes they didn't want us all to come in there, right? Not sometimes, all the time. So Mr. Dick Clark said, listen, if you don't want all of us in here, well, he says, everybody else get on the bus. And he made us all get on the bus. And I just admired him for standing up like that, because he was obviously a white guy, but he really, really stood up for the artists. He says, if all of us can't come in here, then none of us are coming. So he said, get back on the bus. And that happened several times. So, yeah, it was there, but it was more evident, from my early days of me seeing, it was really in the South. The South still was segregated totally. Now in Detroit, we had it in terms of high school, not high school, but elementary school. I remember when busing first started. And so we obviously lived in a black neighborhood, but we were bused into another neighborhood, and that was quite an experience, And we were happy because we were able to go outside of our neighborhood, So we were exposed to a whole nother sort of environment. So all of those changes were things that I gradually found out was what America was all about. So when we became famous and started touring the world, then I actually saw another global um, sort of experience that Black people were beginning to experience. There were a lot of Blacks who had moved to France and different places. Holland was another place, and then you see now a lot of multiracial children, because the Blacks, they moved over there, especially musicians and singers. Josephine Baker being one, but there were a lot of jazz musicians who went over there and stayed.
So, I want to continue on the civil rights for a bit.
Okay, I'm fine.
You mentioned, going to Europe and the reaction there, and what sprung to mind was the new book with the book with the dresses, and I want to touch on, for folks watching, the Supremes defined international glamour at the time of their stardom. I mean, they were imitated in dress. Everything that they did had a profound impact on popular culture, and those gowns and the glamour that you had was extraordinary. Can you talk a little bit about what it felt like to go so rapidly from a teenage girl at her Detroit high school to tone-setting international dress standards and glamour standards?
Go ahead.
Like inside your head.
I'm getting up because you brought something up that I want to bring. I moved my book over there, shelves over there. But how it felt to go from, I've been watching a lot of the documentaries lately on civil rights,
Hmm.
which is a, very timely thing because it's the same thing that was going on then is going on now in a way. But now what changed it were, of course, the laws. And I
Hmm.
think that's why we're seeing so much in terms of the division of America, because it's not, people say, well, when did all this start? We didn't know it was that much racism. It's always been that way. And so I think this election, what it has done is shown that it is still there, but the laws helped to make it, people had to adhere to the laws, which thank
Hmm.
God there are laws, right? So
Hmm.
before you could have slaves. My grandparents were slaves. I mean, you could have that, and people, but they were nice white people. You know what I mean? But still, hey, if you could get someone to work your fields and all those things for cheaper pay, then they were for it. So that's why I mentioned Dick Clark, because he was one of those people who did not sort of adhere to those old beliefs. He says, no, these are, everyone's equal. And if you can't, I mentioned that once before. But anyway, so I brought up my book because the one thing that I love about what people thought about us was that it's about, what's her name? Whoopi Goldberg wrote
Hmm.
the foreword to my book. And she said the most wonderful thing. I don't want to read the whole thing, but this is the book.
Oh, there we go. Yep. Hmm. Hold that up again just for a second longer. Look at that. Great.
But Whoopi wrote the foreword. I won't read it all, but I'm just saying how people thought about seeing, because on TV now you see all kinds of things on TV. But back then, you really didn't see a lot of Black people on TV unless they were maids and
Yeah,
janitors and
that
things
while
like
you're
that.
looking, I just want to emphasize that's an understatement. Uh,
Oh,
you
okay.
Black people were invisible on TV for those
Unvisible, right?
roles.
So let me see. Everything about this. She wrote this for my forward when she was a young girl, and she says everything. I'm trying not to have to read the whole thing. Everything about the Supremes, all those gowns, all those pantsuits, all those caps, gloves, furs, the makeup, the eyelashes, the wigs, made me believe they were speaking to me. I too could be well spoken, tall, majestic, and emissary of Black folks who also came from the projects. Whatever they wore reflected the many looks of Black folks, including their hair, which was everything from an afro to a bob, and that did it for me. That's when I knew I was theirs for life. They were unapologetic and brave. I look back and wonder if they had any idea that they taught me and a whole new generation of the pride of being Black. Diana, Mary, and Flo, my heroes. And
Did
she says,
you did
hmm?
you have any idea of how profound that your impact was, as Whoopi asks?
I, I, I can't speak to everyone, to be honest about it, but I think as being people, as being Black, yes, because we saw a shift in the way people were. I mean, sometimes we would go to department stores and wouldn't get waited on, or someone would follow us around the entire shop thinking we're going to steal something. So when we became famous, yeah, I think I realized it because our parents always told us that, to be, when you walk out the door, you be the best person that you can be because you're representing our race. So, yeah, I knew that we made a difference because the Black people, very few people were, I mean, you have some great Black women who've done some great Black things. In fact, I said when Biden and Kamala Harris won, I said, my, there have been many women who have kicked that ceiling. Many of us, many Black women as well. I mean, there have been many people, but I'm talking about Black people who've kicked that ceiling. And I know we cracked a little bit, and then you have other women who've done the same thing. So I sometimes I get mad when they say that we were only number 16 on that poll of people, because I think that we was, because I still think as a male world, you know, I mean, what I mean, you know, but so women don't get their really due credit. But I think that, you know, we should be a little higher up than that number 16.
Me too.
because we did inspire a lot of, and not just Black people, we inspired people, women, because there was a time when we would go, when we traveled the world, men were in the workplace. Very few women were in the workplace back then, you know, unless they were bringing in the tea or this and that. So, you know, I really think that we really did do a lot more than we've been given credit for. The Diane Carroll is another one who she had one of the first television shows where it was a main Black character on TV. I mean, there were a lot of us out there, and I still think that as Black people, Black women, we don't get the credit. That's why it was such a big deal that Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris. I think that was very wonderful of him, and it shows, you know, that we're not. We used to be called niggers, colored, and all those kind of things. And people look down on us. And it was not a good feeling to have people look down on you when you knew our parents had put pride into us. These young people today, they have no idea because they think that was like way long time ago. But it's in my lifetime.
And mine too.
That's what I'm saying. It's our lifetime, you know.
Yeah.
So they need to see more of these things to understand what it's all about. It's not about Black lives are better than anyone else. That's not it. It's just that we'd like the credit of who we are as human beings. I've always felt very good about myself. In fact, I had one guy who told me, you know, that he didn't tell me, he told someone else, that Mary thinks she is, you know, better than what she is, or she thinks she's a star. Well, I mean, I always felt good about myself. What can I say?
Well, and you are a star, so that's, but I should note we're recording this interview 1 week after Kamala Harris was elected the first woman vice president and first, obviously then African-American elected vice president. And I just want to touch on one other thing you said, Mary, and then change our subject slightly.
Okay, sure.
You know, you mentioned the importance of laws changing and the Civil Rights Act, which made it illegal to not serve in the restaurants in the way you described on the Dick Clark tour, made it illegal to not allow people to stay at your hotel and so forth. But in our civil rights class that you co-taught with us one session, we have that constant debate with our students about law that brings culture forward, or is it culture that moves law forward? There's really no answer, I think, to that question, because you need both together. So the example, the inspiration, the proof of excellence, possibility, glamour that you were for so many people is as important as changing things as the law. I don't think either really happen without the other.
Well, I agree, and I also would like to add to that in that each young generation that comes to the fore, you know, they're the ones who actually move everything forward, the younger people. So I applaud them, because I think back in those days, in the 60s, we young people were the ones who helped to move things forward. So a lot of times, you know, our parents are so accustomed to what happened to them in the past that they can't really make a lot of, you know, moves. And so their children, and that's why I think that parents should, and as our parents did, you know, should tell their children, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what we have to do in order to better our world, to better our situations. So if the parents are honest, you know, as our parents were, and I'm talking, you know, whites as well as blacks, then the children get the proper information. So I applaud this generation of people. Someone would say, well, why is everyone out there on the streets talking about Black Lives Matter, but there's all young people and it's more white? Because, you know, they grew up with probably parents who, you know, told them what it was all about. And so now this young generation is making a lot of moves to change. And as you mentioned, yes, laws have got to be changed, and that's how they're changed. That's really how they changed. I mean, we marched back in the day. So I'm very, I mean, I hung out with uh, John Lewis and Martin Luther King, all the guys, yeah.
The
So
guys.
well, yeah, there was mostly guys there, but and then people like Lena Horne. Speaking of the women, there were many women who went out there and marched, for this
Oh,
freedom. So there were a
absolutely.
lot. There were a lot of people who did it, and I'm very
Yeah.
happy that we were around at the time and we did it as well. Yes.
So I want to jump forward a little bit
Hmm.
because we at the library, and this recording is for your papers, and those are legal
Yes.
papers that
Yes.
also our story will end with some happy law changes. This story
Hmm.
as well, but not starting that way. So the papers concern lawsuits that arose after your time with the Supremes was done, but you were still performing and were
Hmm.
were Mary Wilson of the Supremes, which
Hmm.
exactly what you were.
Hmm.
But the record company didn't like that. Could you tell us about that?
Okay, yeah, because when we disbanded, 1977, it was a time when I just decided it was time for me to go on as a soloist, and I did. But as I think you mentioned it tonight, that if I were to leave the group, whatever, I couldn't use the name Supremes, and so the record company actually it said I couldn't use the name Supremes. And so I was, this was after we had become famous and done had all the great records. And I mean, I was known as the Supreme. So I kind of defied them. I went on and I still called myself Mary Wilson of the Supremes, or said Mary Wilson and the Supremes, and or any way I could use it, I used it. I did because after so much had happened, I know I shouldn't go back into my friend Florence Ballard, but when she was no longer in the group, she couldn't use the name Supremes as well, and it really hurt her. It hurt her in terms of not being able to go out and call herself as Florence Ballard of the Supremes. So I had learned my lesson, and I said, you know what, let them stop me, and that was a pretty, for me, people thought I was kind of nice and soft and whatever, but it was time that I stood up for what I really believed in, and that's what I did. So I
So,
and pretty soon they stopped even bothering me.
well, let's talk about that a little bit because, of course, it's hard to exaggerate how nonsensical it might seem to a non-lawyer for you not to be able to say, I'm Mary Wilson of the Supremes. I mean, it was
Mhm.
like if Paul McCartney couldn't say, I'm Paul McCartney of the Beatles. I mean, it is a reality. It is a fact. It's an internationally known thing. And yet the contract that you signed with Motown in 1961, which now resides in the archives at the Ohio State
One of the copies.
University, a copy of it. Yes. We're proud. What can I say? I'm looking at
Yes.
that, and it says, in the event you withdraw from the group or for any reason cease to participate, you shall have no further right to use the group name, which is the Supremes, for any purpose. So,
Mhm.
when you were going through the papers and you see that with your signature at the end of this contract, your 16-year-old
Mhm.
1961 signature. And I think because you were a minor, your mom
Yes.
signed Johnny Mae Wilson. Her name's there at the end too.
Right.
Emotions does that bring out to see that and know how that was held against you to stop you from using the name?
Now, this is my time to help to talk to your legal students, because it's very important that they understand that no matter how much you want to have something, make sure you get the proper representation, or people to look at things. What we didn't realize that what, let me say this, we really wanted to be at Motown Records, so we would have signed anything they gave us. You know what I mean? And the other thing is that we didn't even read it. Well, I can't talk about everyone else, but I know I didn't read it. And my mother, whom I mentioned, said couldn't read or write. She didn't read it. And the thing about that is, I would have signed my grandchildren away. Okay, to be at Motown Records. All right, that's all I can say. However, let me tell you, on that contract that you just mentioned, we were not only forbidden to use the name, our name Supremes, we were also told that any fictitious name we were to get, which we were going to be signing, that's when we first became the Supremes, we were given that to the record company. Now, I think had we read it, or had someone read it to us, had the proper legal representation, we would have thought, and said, well, is there any way we can maybe take that out or something? But we didn't read it. I mean, I say I didn't read it. So therefore, it was something that we realized later on that we had given up a lot.
And so when you realized that and you decided it was wrong, you
Well,
went
see,
ahead and used the name.
the thing about it is, I realized that when it came up with Florence Ballard, that's the first time I really realized it. So that was in 1967. So, all those years we were famous, I didn't even know that. We all thought that we owned the name Supremes because that's who we were.
Right.
That's who we were. So we didn't even think about it not being there. So when it happened, yeah, and then when my turn came to kind of move out, I realized I was going to have to do something different than what Florence was able to do. I was
So,
stronger
so
then.
tell us what you did.
What I was stronger then, and I first of all, I used it. I used the name Supremes any way I want. In fact, there's a lady who goes around who says she's a Supreme because I called the group Mary Wilson and the Supremes. Well, there was no contract for her to be a Supreme, so she tells everyone that she was a Supreme. But I had to do that. I had to do it because I realized that I had to stop what was happening to us.
And
so
they sued you.
I think that I'm trying to see, did I sue them first or they sued me? It was a lot of lawsuits going on. Well, you held up the paper, so I'm going to have to come and see what happened first, the chicken or the eggs. But anyway, we were in lawsuits. Alan, let me tell you, lawsuits. I have spent probably several $1 million in lawsuits trying to get the name Supremes back. And I've never been able to do it. Now we mentioned the Music Modernization Act, but we didn't mention the one before that, which is called the Truth in Music legislation. And it has to do with anyone who's out there calling themselves by a famous group name cannot do so unless there's at least one member in that group who recorded the music. And so we have a lot of people running around now a lot of groups calling themselves the Supremes. I mean, you can go and you can see them on the website. In fact, I think you guys should check that out. I think I told Casey about it, and see how many people are saying Supreme, and they shouldn't. They didn't make the records. We make the records. And even though some of them, I hired a lot of girls, beautiful singers, but I mean, they still can't say they were Supremes from the 60s. They can be the 70s Supremes, because that's legitimate. But then the girls who were just part of who I hired, and they can now go around and say they were a member of the Supremes, or they were not. They didn't have after 1977, there was no one who had a recording contract, not even me.
And so the law you're talking about set requirements for truth to consumers kind of law that says you can't call yourself that unless you have original members.
Exactly. That was one, and I'm still working to try to get into the federal courts. So I have to say that Hawaii just signed, their governor there just signed it into law in Hawaii. So we're getting closer to being able to put it into the federal courts.
Now that is the culmination of a 30 some odd year battle on your part. And I think there were lawsuits headed in both directions. You were sued to stop using the name,
Yes.
sued to stop them from giving the name out to others.
Mhm. I was so, in other words, I was sued by two members who had been in the group in the 70s. I was sued by them. Then I was sued and I lost both of these lawsuits. Sued by the person who still says that she was a supreme and she was not. So I've been sued and I lost them all.
And you lost, well, not lost, expended millions of dollars,
Mhm.
for estimate of
Yes.
spending on that. And so one question I have is, how do you're a vibrant person here, you're an ageless person, you're a grandmother of 10, and the glamour and excitement and the smile are all still there.
Oh, I forgot to. I'm a doctor. I have a doctorate from Payne University. I did it, and I did one of their commencement speeches, and they gave me a doctorate. So I am a.
So,
But
so
I
that's
don't.
perfect. Dr. Wilson, my question is, how do you balance that decades long? I'm not diminishing it. I mean, most people who were in a legal fight that took decades and cost millions of dollars, take it from
Yeah.
most people, get pretty beaten down, especially when the conclusion of the lawsuits is not in their favor. The settlement is not what they
Yeah.
had hoped or
Yeah.
deserved, from a moral perspective. How do you maintain that positive energy in the face of,
Who was it who says, "I am what I am"? Popeye.
yeah, that was Popeye.
Um, because
Spinach,
you know,
that's the key.
yeah, but that is the key. I think, and some people say, well, who really, what woman or man or whatever inspired you? And I still say my mom, Johnny May, who couldn't read nor write. You know, and there's so many people out there like me who have just been, life sometimes have not, they've been, these people have not been dealt good cards and they were not able to handle what life throws at you. Life can throw a lot of things at you. And people say, well, how does it feel to have had all that stuff happen to you, all that negativity? I'm like, well, it just goes right straight through across my head. I don't know. I am just who I am. And I thank God every day that I'm still able to wake up in the morning and smile. I used to think I was Doris Day, and she says, "Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be." So I think that's just who I am, and I'm so happy that I am who I am. And some people say, "Well, weren't you jealous of Diane?" I'm like, "Why should I be jealous of Diane? I love me. I
Well,
have always loved me."
Dr. Wilson, I want to press you on that point a little bit, because I think your point about who you are
Mm,
being a key to your ability to withstand this with such positivity makes perfect sense. But I want to press you because the rest of us can't be you. I
that's
want to press you for an answer for other women,
good.
other people, but particularly women, perhaps particularly people of color, who
Mm-hmm,
have fights that they have that they're
mm-hmm,
given their due in one circumstance or another. How you balance getting what's fair with
mm-hmm.
living a happy life
Right.
when you have to fight for it.
Well, it's amazing because people ask me that all the time, and I have. I mentioned I lost my son when he was 14 years old, and a lot of things people know about me, but I really feel that it's the same. You are who you are. And I think that somehow or another, maybe parents, maybe teachers, uh, really need to show or show each child who that child is. It's one of those things where you can have 4 or 5 children, and each one's different. So you can't treat them all the same. You got to treat them for who they are. And I think a lot of times, sometimes we parents are so busy. Even my daughter tells me, Mom, you were on the road all the time. You weren't always there. But that's true. And so I couldn't give them exactly what I should have given them. So I applaud the moms who can stay there at home, but sometimes we can't. So every minute you're with them, you've got to give them everything that you can, the honesty, the truth. And, that's what the Bible's all about, the truth. So you got to give them just the truth. I guess I was given the truth. And so all I can say to everyone out there is that, really, I think was it Michael Jackson who said the man in the mirror, always look in the mirror, always try to see who you are, but be truthful to yourself. You know, it's like that golden king, he rides out on a horse and with no clothes on. Everybody sees he has no clothes on, but he's kept, thinking whatever. So we can't be like that. You got to be honest with yourself. If you're honest with yourself, I think that we can endure everything. It's not easy. I mean, it's not easy. I have people in my family who are going through some rough times. So it's no, it's I don't think there's one answer except truth,
Well,
love.
that's a good answer. So thank you. I want to fast forward us a little bit to the present.
Okay.
The battles with for musicians' rights have continued. They've been a hallmark and something you're still active in. Where do you see things? How do you see things stand now? What are things that you're most pleased about?
In the music, right? Sorry,
Yes.
sorry. Well, yeah, I think we're moving in the right um, place because I've been speaking with a lot of legislators and people who are really activists who are really working to and to help musicians, to help singers, and all this. I mean, there are a lot of organizations out there. In fact, I got one. Let me just look on where is it? Oh, it's another one. RIIA. They gave me an award, and so there's so many different organizations out there who are really working for us.
Hmm.
And that's a good thing because I didn't realize so many people were working for the artist. And they're working to change some of the laws, the legislations, and all these kind of things. In fact, that's how we got that Music Modernization Act moving forward because we had so much help. A lot of us went on up on the Hill to advocate for and lobby for all of these different changes. So that as long as people are working for each other, to have a fair chance at what's going on, and change some of the laws. I mean, some of the laws are just antiquated. They
Yeah.
need
So
it's time to be changed.
this brings us back to that discussion of laws and popular viewpoint. And
Mhm.
want to we've talked both about truth in music legislation and the Music Modernization Act, about
Mhm.
the truth
Mhm.
in music, which
Right.
is the one that Hawaii just passed, and I think 35 states now have
Mhm.
that say you can't just, I can't go out and say Alan Michaels of the Supremes because I wasn't in the Supremes.
Mhm.
Um, but the Music Modernization Act is about a different issue, and it's
Yes.
about royalties going to the folks who made the music. Is that
Well, the Modernization Act is about uh, artists who recorded pre 1972 have not been getting paid when songs are digitally and on all these different Spotify's and your all those kind of things. So that's the difference is artists who recorded after or post 1992
70,
72, sorry,
72?
72, they were being paid. So it's the new technology that has come into play. You see, that's changed a lot of things. So whereas people used to be able to go out to all of the, record shops and buy their records and, all those different things, they can't do that anymore because they've all closed out. The mom and
Mm-hmm.
pop stores are all closed. So what do? They download them now with all of the new technology that's out there. But guess what? We artists don't get paid when that happens because who's going to get the money? So this requires, so the new Music Modernization Act will stop that from happening. I don't know if it's gotten into the works yet because it's only just recently been passed. So, hopefully then whenever people download music and things of that nature, we will be paid.
But, and it has been passed. And so that must have felt good.
Well, it felt good, yes, because I don't know, I found myself fighting, become a fighter for causes, but only for things I really believe in, and because we the Supremes were so famous that I don't think we should be ripped off when just because technology is in there, and we're not catching up with it. So we got to catch up with the technology that's out there, so that a lot of people have died. The artists who were recording in the 50s and early 60s, a lot of them have passed. So they passed not having received the kind of monies that they should have. So their children, their grandchildren, I mean, some people are still living in poverty because of that. So there's a lot of money being made. I mean, these big music corporations, I mean, they're getting money. So that's what we're fighting for, to see if we can change that slight in terms of proper monies being allocated to the artist.
So my last question, and thank you again for all your time and your generosity, and it's a joy for me, and thank you. One final question for advice for someone back in the stage you were in, whether it's 1958 or 1960 or 1961, but someone pursuing their dream, and they have a dream that doesn't seem possible. I'm sure you get asked this question. What advice do you give to someone like that?
First of all, I think the advice I can give to people who are still daring to dream, like we the Supremes dare to dream at a time when it was an impossible dream for us. But I think that people should realize America is a great country because many, many dreams have come true. So therefore, your possibilities of your dreams coming true are huge. You don't have as many obstacles, legal wise, and all those kind of things. You can make your dreams come true easy compared to think about what your parents had to go through, or people who are black or whatever. Some people say, I can't do this because I'm fat. I can't do that because I'm this. I can't do, forget that. If you believe in something and you want it, go for it. Be passionate about it. Go for it, because these dreams can come true. I mean, I'm living proof that they can. I'm a black woman who dared to dream when people said, no, you cannot go forward.
Well, we are so glad that you did. And so thank you again, and congratulations on everything. I've got an autographed picture of the two of us. It's not in my home office, it's in my work office, which is why it's not over my shoulder in these pandemic times. But I treasure it, and thank you. And I see Nena's rejoined us.
I want to thank you so much, Dr. Mary Wilson, Professor Alan Michaels, for this really incredible experience.
Oh, good.
Again, I would say that the Ohio State University Libraries is so honored to hold the Mary Wilson collection, and let our listeners know that Ms. Wilson's advocacy for music rights, musicians' rights, and this collection really offers students and scholars a rich opportunity to delve into her amazing work, which, as you've heard, is ongoing today. We look forward to Ms. Wilson's next visit to campus.
Me too.
Professor Michaels can continue this critical conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure for me as well. I can't wait to get back there, okay?
I'm glad to hear that, Mary.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you so much.